So I'm going to give Pierre Poilievre A+ for being a critic. But that's all I'm giving him an A+ for. I don't agree with pretty much anything else he states because he's out of touch. And he does not understand what Canadians need and what the Canadian economy needs. I'll let him speak for himself here.
Potash fertilizer producer announced plans to build a $1 billion port in Longview, Washington, over Canada's west coast, citing regulations as a key factor. Finally, Financial Times says a mine in Canada takes 20 years.
Now, what you do need to know with Nutrien, the Saskatchewan Potash Company, Saskatchewan government, I think, probably could have got more involved. I can't speak for them, I don't know. But Nutrien has a huge deep port facility in the Port of Vancouver. They don't control 100% of it, though. Now, back in 1997, they have a facility they have built in Portland, Oregon. And this new port that Financial Times referenced and Mr. Poilievre mentioned for Nutrien in Longview, Washington, is a deepwater berth port that's 52 miles away, just north of Portland, Oregon. So strategically, it makes sense for them to expand that operation down there. Otherwise, it's an orphan operation. So could Saskatchewan maybe offered a better deal? Yeah. 2 out of 3 points that were a concern for Nutrien could have been accommodated by the Saskatchewan government, but they failed to deliver based on what we've seen so far. There could be other extenuating circumstances. I'm not part of the negotiations. I'm not privy to any other information that may change the way I think. So back to Mr. Poilievre.
To build, according to S&P Global. They also point out that a tentative agreement signed in November between Ottawa and Alberta to build a 1 million barrel a day pipeline missed an April deadline. Industry blames regulatory hurdles, a costly decarbonization requirement, and the lack of clarity around carbon pricing. Some of the countries around the world, you will note, have sovereign wealth funds. You need to have wealth for those funds. Norway, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia run big budget surpluses, which they accumulate and then put into their sovereign wealth funds.
I'm going to switch to another screen here. Now, the Norway Fund was built or started in 1990. Now, understand, Norway is a nation of only 5 million people, and they have resources, which does create a surplus, but because of the small nature of the demographics of their country, they've made it a requirement that all those funds needed to be invested outside of Norway in order to make their fluctuations minimal. So they want to mitigate the ups and downs of a resource nation. And this is why the investments are built up and invested outside the country. Now, another thing you need to know, and I'm going to switch to another screen for that, is that Canada, in the 1970s, had started on their own energy independence. And it was officially launched as a national energy program in 1980. And we're going to switch to that screen now. Here we are. Give you an overview of what I'm speaking about. During the 1970s, a Liberal government under Pierre Elliott Trudeau was reacting to global oil shocks. The OPEC embargo is one of them. So specifically the 1973 Arab oil embargo and the 1979 Iranian Revolution, by moving towards greater federal control of energy to ensure Canadian self-sufficiency. Well, the formal National Energy Program was officially launched in 1980. The foundational policies were established throughout the mid to late 1970s, including price controls, the creation of a national oil company, and increased taxes on exports. So this is how Petro-Canada came into play. It used to be BP throughout Canada. British Petroleum. British Petroleum was an offshoot of the Iran, and as mentioned, 1979 Iranian Revolution was the end part after 1953. In 1953 in Iran, the United States and Britain, because they're worried about the oil, funded a coup d'etat, which ended up destroying a democracy in the making, a democracy that was forming out of the control of the Shah of Iran at the time. So Britain and the U.S. funded a coup d'etat to put the Shah back into the driver's seat. And because of that, the Shah's oppressive and repressive way of running the country allowed for the revolution to take place in 1979. Everybody wants to blame Carter. You know, the U.S. has created a lot of the Iranian problems that exist now just based on their own actions. They do things and then they leave them and they just do things half-assed. So let's go back to where I'm trying to make a point here. Key aspects of the 1970 Trudeau oil policy: creation of Petro-Canada, 1975, made in Canada price controls. Now, when you can protect consumers and industries which depend on imports by having prices lower to protect consumers and industries, that would be a major advantage. And that was the whole point behind the National Energy Program, to keep energy under price controls to make it affordable for all Canadians. And then the export taxes in 1973, which the Canadian government, under a Liberal government, imposed upon oil exported to the United States. And also, they extended an interprovincial pipeline to Montreal, which was completed in 1976, to connect Western Canadian oil to Eastern Canadian markets. As well, the federal government invested, along with Alberta and Ontario, into Syncrude oil sands plant to prevent its failure. So the controversy over this was that Western Canada said that created alienation. You hear it again in Alberta right now. Say, federal government doesn't help us with our oil. But meanwhile, here you see right now, the Liberal government was all hands on deck, creating a federal national energy program. So Western alienation as a result of this was what was created. There was intense friction between the federal government, oil-producing provinces, particularly Alberta, which felt it was losing revenue and control over its natural resources. So critics argued the interprovincial approach of the 70s and the subsequent 1980 NEP, National Energy Program, stifled growth and investment in the oil sector. And historically, as you've seen thereafter, that could be disputed. There's pros and cons to both sides of the fence there. So these 1970 initiatives directly laid the groundwork for the 1980 National Energy Program, which sought to further increase Canadian ownership of the oil industry and raise federal revenue. Now I'm going to switch to the next screen. Okay, so now we have the National Energy Program. So officially, from 1970 to 1980, major steps were in place to create what ended up becoming the National Energy Program in 1980. The economically nationalist policy sought to secure Canadian energy independence. So back in 1970, a Liberal government was working to create energy independence, and it was incorporated as a national energy program in 1980. Even though it was strongly opposed by the private sector, you see this now with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. All these nayers, all these negatories, and the same thing's happening. We already had this, and we had an advantage over other countries by getting involved earlier, but we torpedoed it. And believe it or not, progressive conservative government, yes, you heard me right, a progressive conservative government torpedoed the program. So we would have had Canadian energy independence a long time ago, But the progressive conservatives destroyed it, like they did with the Avro Arrow. They destroyed it. And all those engineers went and formed NASA down in the United States, and look what they did. They landed people on the moon, made rockets. So, National Energy Program was created under the Liberal government of Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau in October 1980, after two oil crises of the 1970s. And the main objectives, there's three main objectives. Number one, increase ownership of the oil industry by Canadians, price energy fairly for Canadian consumers, and provide Canadian energy self-sufficiency. So we already had that in the works back in the 70s. Conservatives killed it, like they want to kill everything else. It's really been the trend. So, National Energy Program was highly controversial, sparked intense opposition by guess what, and anger in Western Canada, particularly in Alberta. The province's Premier Peter Lougheed was a vocal opponent of the National Energy Program. He stated it interfered with provincial jurisdiction and unfairly deprived Alberta of oil revenues. So in 1981, Lougheed, Premier of Alberta, and the federal government under Trudeau reached a revenue sharing agreement. Now, the opponents to that agreement stated that due to the National Energy Program, unemployment went up in Alberta, bankruptcy rate in Alberta rose, and Alberta's losses were estimated to be between $50 billion and $100 billion. Although, what you don't hear, Alberta's employment rate, bankruptcy rate, and revenue losses were affected by the early 1980s recession and, get this, a crash in oil prices. Once you're resource dependent within one sector and its free markets, the rise and fall of energy in that sector can mean crash or boom. And this is what's happened in Western Canada, off and on for a long time. So what the term Western alienation, as per this noted here, was coined as a result of the National Energy Program. But we would have had energy independence by now. Prices would have been fair. But what happened? The newly elected progressive conservative government of Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, June 1, 1985, killed the deal. The National Energy Program was repealed. So because of the National Energy Program, you had the creation and rise of a Canadian, Western Canada-based right-wing populist Reform Party. That's why you got the UCP in Alberta, all based on the Reform Party. Reform Party was Stephen Harper. Joe Clark lost. Peter MacKay became the leader of the Conservative Party. They were floundering because after Brian Mulroney, when they were on the outs, Conservative parties tanked. So they created a merger. Stephen Harper torpedoed Peter MacKay, stabbed him in the back. But Peter MacKay, a good conservative, still wears the Conservative badge on his left shoulder. So the Reform Party is the Conservative Party now. And this is why we have this extreme right-wing Christian nationalism, white supremacist influence within the Conservative Party. So that's what happened there. So let's move back to our main screen. Okay, we're back to Mr. Pierre Poilievre. Take it away, Pierre.
Norway, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia run big budget surpluses, which they accumulate and then put into their sovereign wealth funds. Carney has no surplus and therefore no wealth to put in such a fund. He's talking about a sovereign debt fund. He wants to put another $25 billion on the national credit card to gamble on a Liberal slush fund that will enrich Liberal insiders at the expense of hardworking Canadians. How many corporate welfare agencies do the Trudeau-Carney Liberals need to create before they learn that it doesn't work? They have the Canada Infrastructure Fund. Remember the Infrastructure Bank? Remember that was going to invest in all these projects? What happened with that? There's a new defence industry bank. There's the Canada Growth Fund. and countless other departmental agencies that Liberals have created and grown over the last decade to give us the worst.
Hey, most of these funds mentioned are created recently as a result of the actions of the United States.
Investment and growth in the G7. And here we are. It's deja vu all over again. Borrowing yet another $25 billion out of the economy.
Hold on. See, here's where you have a problem. This is where I have a problem. Because Pierre Poilievre does not understand how money is created in a sovereign nation like Canada. He seems to think you're taking the money out of the streets of Canada, out of the pockets of Canadians, to put into the fund. That's not how it works. The money comes from the Canadian Treasury, not out of the pockets of Canadians, not out of the economy. This guy doesn't understand how money's created and how money needs to be created and flowed into the economy to build up Canadians to mitigate affordability issues and invest in the programs that are necessary to support mitigating affordability issues. And we've seen I just shown you the National Energy Program. The 1970s, if we allowed that program to continue to this day, we'd have energy independence. We wouldn't have to rely on anybody, wouldn't have to rely on the Americans. And you've seen what happened. It was the progressive conservatives that killed the program. It was the progressive conservatives under the guise of the Reform Party that did not want the programs to begin with. They were fighting it, and they're still fighting it to this day. This belief system that was created back in the 1970s still exists and still gets in the way of progress of this nation. You see how the Christian nationalist movement of Donald Trump is strong in Alberta. You see it under the Daniel Smith government, white supremacy, Zionist movement. You see it also in Ontario under Doug Ford to a lesser degree, but it's there. Both of them have no issue with using the notwithstanding clause. Pierre Poilievre has no issue with using the notwithstanding clause. So that tells you a lot. So I think I've made my point very clear. Conservative government is not going to help Canadians, especially under the situation now. As a matter of fact, their ideology and their policies are what created, that is what has created the affordability issue. That's created the housing crisis. And now we've got to change that. And you're not going to change it in 12 months. You're not going to change it in 36 months or 60 months. This is going to take some time, but the investments start now. We've already got 20 new trade deals. These take time to sort out, but we already have 20 new trade deals. This is why Carney's not at the House of Commons all the time. He's been actually putting together trade deals with international partners that are going to bear fruit as we move forward. Mr. Poilievre is just operating from his mind in a position of ego because he wants to be in the driver's seat, but all he wants to do is cut taxes and rely on free markets. And we've seen what free markets have done. They've only lined the pockets of the corporations that support conservative governments. You got to understand, during the last election, the only front page newspaper advertisements supporting the progressive conservatives was the largest corporations in Canada. The largest investment bankers in Canada were supporting the conservatives. So don't buy into this nonsense because there's a lot of non-truths. Use discernment. Don't go by what I say, but do your research and find out for yourself the truth. I've shown you truths because the National Energy Program right there, it existed. I witnessed it. I lived through it. I've seen it. And I've seen what's happening now. So you can keep going back to pain and suffering, or you can move into a different way of living, which is benevolence, which includes everybody, harmony, and abundance. And you can make that choice. You just make that choice now. Pain and suffering, benevolence, harmony, and abundance. Your choice. You can make that choice right now. Start by being kind to yourself. Sending love and peace to everyone. Ciao for now.